After a strong storm hits his ship, a boy ends up adrift with an adult Bengal tiger, and now both will have to help each other stay alive. Stay tuned, as there will be spoilers ahead. Get your snacks ready, settle in, and let's dive into this incredible journey with him. Popcorn Session Channel presents Life of P. We begin with Jan Martel, the writer, engaging in a dialogue with P. Patel at his residence. He arrived there after Francis, Pi's uncle, revealed that this man's extraordinary life story could result in an excellent book and also renew his faith in God. Pi starts narrating his journey from the beginning, starting with his name, derived from Uncle Francis's love for swimming pools. His swimming lessons, in fact, proved crucial in saving his life at a critical moment. He continues, sharing about Francis's passion for collecting pools, swimming in everyone he came across. One day, Francis told P's father that among all the pools in the world, the most beautiful one was in France, called Piscine Molitor, with water so clear it could be drunk. Taking this seriously to ensure his son was born with a pure soul, P's father named him Piscine Molitor Patel.
English translation. The name had never been a problem until he was 11 years old, when the boys at his school started teasing him about his name, Pippi, as well as making other puns and tasteless jokes. In just 1 second, he went from being the best swimmer in the world to a little Indian who wet his pants. However, determined to change that, Pi takes advantage of the beginning of a new school year to show his skills and knowledge in mathematics. More specifically, in questions that revolved around the number 3.14, thus presenting himself to everyone as Pi. And whenever possible, he showed that he mastered the subject, which captivated the students and teachers, who after a long time started to call him Pi instead of Pippi. And obviously this change pleased the young man very much, who became a famous figure in the school. Back at home, Pi serves a meal for both of them and warns that the story may seem miraculous, and the writer must decide for himself what to believe in, and then he continues telling that, in his childhood he lived in Pondicherry, a place with a strong French legacy, and with a Muslim neighborhood right next door. And years before he was born, to earn money with a city festival, Santosh Patel, Pi's father, opened a zoo in the botanical garden of the hotel he managed, where Geeta Patel, Pi's mother, also worked. Back home, we see Pi explaining that he is a Hindu Catholic, and therefore believes in more than one God, so Pi begins to tell how he was first introduced to God. As a child, his mother showed him Krishna of Hinduism, being this the first God he met, and also his first religion. English translation. The boy loved to learn more about the gods, and he saw them as superheroes. However, his father was totally the opposite of his mother, and believed in more concrete things like science and medicine, seeing religion as a myth, and doubting that gods existed. Then we see that as he grew up, Pi came to know other religions. One day, after losing a bet and having to drink holy water in a church, Pi is introduced to Jesus, and becoming intrigued with his story, the boy begins to want to know more and more about the Catholic religion, and thus he becomes a Catholic, but without giving up being a Hindu. However, it did not stop there, and then he meets and begins to follow Islam, the religion that made him feel as if he had a place to belong. Thus Pi came to believe in 3 religions, besides also being a vegan. But this also makes his father and brother make fun of him, because according to Santosh, believing in everything at the same time is the same as not having any belief, but this does not affect the boy, and he continues firm in his principles. He comments that one day he took his brother to the cage of Richard Parker, a tiger from the zoo, and Pi does this in the intention of feeding the animal very close, but seeing that it was not going to work, his brother gets up and calls Santosh, who arrives just before the tiger gets too close to Pi. Santosh scares the animal and pulls the boy away from the cage, furious with the naivety of his son, who firmly believes that animals have a soul and that it can be seen in their eyes. But Santosh says that all that exists in their eyes are reflections of himself and nothing more. Determined to show that things are not so simple, Santosh orders someone to bring a goat and tie it near the cage. Then they release the tiger, which quickly attacks the goat and finishes it off, all of this in front of Pi and his family. Due to this, Pi's faith was shaken, for him the world had lost its grace. So the years passed and he grew up unhappy, trying to find something that would give meaning to his life again. And then one day, while substituting for his teacher giving rhythm to a dance class, he met Anandi, a young dancer who captivated Pi, and because of that, that same day he followed the girl in search of trying to talk to her. While he was observing the young woman, Pi ends up being caught red-handed by Anandi and her friends, so he takes the opportunity to ask about the dance moves that Anandi did in class and that he didn't understand. English translation. From that day on, Pi and Anandi spend more time together, getting closer and closer, until one day while having dinner with his family, Pi receives the bad news that the zoo's business is not going well, and because of that the whole family will need to move to Canada and sell the animals. Even though he is not happy about this, there is nothing Pi can do, so he takes advantage of the remaining time with Anandi to say goodbye to the girl and create some good memories, and before leaving he promises that one day he will come back for her. We then move on to the Patel family, who is on a ship heading to their new home. As soon as it is time for dinner, Geeta asks the cook for vegetarian food, who refuses and even makes fun of the woman, and seeing this, Santosh gets angry and attacks the cook, but it ends up not helping anything and they return to the table eating only rice. While sitting at the table, the Patel family meets a sailor who tries to make friends with them. He was a kind Buddhist who tries to cheer up the family, but it doesn't work very well. Later we see Pi and Santosh talking while taking care of the animals, and Pi tells Jan that through this conversation he realized that leaving India was much more difficult for his father than for him. After sitting on a park bench, Pi continues telling that on a night while passing through the Mariana Trench, the ship was caught in the middle of a strong storm, causing huge waves to hit the ship violently, and this made the ship swing like a kite. When he realized what was happening, Pi got up excited and went outside to see the storm, which despite being dangerous did not prevent Pi from getting excited. However, things quickly get complicated and a lot of water starts to enter the ship. Pi quickly returns to try to wake up and help his parents, but the place was completely flooded, and Pi is forced to return to the top of the ship and ask for help from the sailors. The sailors were unmooring a lifeboat, and in the chaos, Pi ends up falling into the boat after being pushed. At the same time, we see the animals running desperately through the ship, until a zebra falls on top of the boat where Pi was, causing the boat to fall into the water and be pushed away from the ship by the strong waves. Pi screams for help, but his attempts are in vain, so when he looks into the darkness he sees someone swimming towards him. Pi quickly helps, but soon realizes that it was not a person, but Richard Parker. In fear the boy throws himself into the sea, and underwater he realizes that the ship is already completely sunk, and seeing this Pi quickly returns to the surface, and wanting to remain intact he clings to the mast of the boat while using all the strength of his lungs to scream for his family, but even after that no one comes to him. The next morning, Pi wakes up and sees that the only thing in the boat is the injured zebra, so he gets out of the mast and starts to bail out the water from the boat. However, a hyena soon appears from under the tarp and scares Pi, who runs back to the mast. While he is there, Pi sees on the horizon a female orangutan floating towards him on top of some bananas. Pi helps the animal climb into the boat and asks where her babies are, but the orangutan just looks out to sea with sadness. As night fell, the hyena began to attack the wounded zebra. Even though Pi and the orangutan tried to stop it, they were unsuccessful and the zebra died. The next day, while searching through a bag that was on the boat, Pi found a guide on how to survive at sea, along with several life jackets and many supplies. After seeing the guide, Pi had the idea of making a makeshift raft with the materials. However, as soon as he finished, the hyena came out from under the tarp and attacked the orangutan, which was unfortunately killed. Enraged with the hyena, Pi decided to fight her, but before he could do so, Richard Parker appeared out of nowhere from under the tarp and attacked the hyena, quickly killing her. Seeing all this, Pi jumped into the sea and quickly went to his makeshift raft to avoid being the next victim. Later, in order to get some supplies, Pi returned to the boat while Richard Parker was taking a nap. While eating, Pi saw a rat on top of the supplies, and at that moment Richard Parker appeared and attacked the boy, who ran from one side to the other. But seeing that it was not going to be easy, Pi threw the rat to the tiger and quickly returned to the raft. During the night, the tiger began to eat the zebra's body, while Pi watched everything and cried with sadness due to his terrible situation. The next day, the sun rises and makes the calm waters of the sea look like a magnificent mirror reflecting the endless sky. Pi takes paper and pen and writes a letter, putting it in a container and throwing it into the sea, in the hope that one day it will reach someone. Then he begins to study the survival manual assiduously, and he masters some good skills to stay alive. Using a technique he saw in the book, he takes advantage of the waves to make Richard Parker uncomfortable while whistling all the time, so that in the future the tiger will feel the same way every time he hears the whistle. Then Pi gets on the boat and starts marking territory in front of the tiger, but Richard Parker has the same idea, and unfortunately for Pi, the animal marks territory on his face. Later, Pi begins his attempt to catch some fish, to be able to satisfy Richard Parker's hunger and avoid becoming tiger food. However, things do not go well and Pi fails to catch anything. English translation. But Richard Parker is a natural hunter, and seeing the fish in the water, he jumps to get a snack. After swimming after the fish, Richard Parker turns and starts to go towards Pi, who despairs and climbs onto the boat, pulling the raft onto the boat in the intention of leaving the tiger in the sea. Pi even threatens to kill the animal, but when he looks at the cute little face of the kitten, he can't do it, so he puts the supplies on the raft and then helps the tiger back to the boat, while he himself gets out of the boat. On another day, after taking inventory of his supplies, Pi succeeds in catching a fish, which he kills with several blows. However, after doing this, he begins to cry for having taken a life, and then he thanks Vishnu, the Hindu god, for providing him with the animal that will serve to feed Richard Parker. Night falls quickly, and Pi is amazed looking at the seawater, until a huge whale jumps out of the water and ends up knocking over all the supplies on the raft, which are thus lost in the vastness of the ocean. After several days have passed, Pi begins to lose hope due to the lack of food and drinking water, but at that moment several flying fish appear there while fleeing from their predators. Several fish fall into the boat, including one of these predators, and seeing that the tiger wanted the largest fish, Pi shows his dominance to Richard Parker and manages to catch it to feed himself, eating the fish raw. English translation. The next day, unable to stand it anymore on the raft, Pi prepares and confronts the tiger to conquer his space in the boat, and in fact he succeeds in taming the animal. In addition to getting his space there, he also started a new relationship with the tiger, becoming closer to Richard Parker and training him to some extent. After so much time has passed, Pi has adapted to his new and unwanted lifestyle, in addition to also having learned to survive in the open sea, managing to even make a place to rest. He also relies on the help of a diary to record his experiences and thoughts, revealing that he no longer knows what is real and what is not. Pi also realized that what is keeping him on his toes is the fear of becoming tiger food, the same tiger that gave him a purpose to keep living, as having to feed Richard Parker is the only thing that distracts his attention from the terrible situation in which they are both. So the days pass, until one day Pi sees a ship on the horizon, which gives him hope, but it does not last long, because even after using all the flares, no one comes to his rescue, and Pi forces himself to keep going, moving forward with Richard Parker, while even suffering from hallucinations. Then one day he and the tiger are caught in the middle of a terrible storm, which shakes the boat violently and takes away the diary. But even in the midst of all this, Pi looks at the dazzling light in the midst of the storm and begins to praise God, and even removes the protective tarpaulin so that Richard Parker can see it with him, but the tiger is suffering and scared, so Pi starts screaming and venting, wanting to know what else he needs to lose. The next day, after the end of the storm, Pi wakes up and hydrates himself with rainwater. He also gives some to the tiger, who apparently is already in his last moments, so he sits down and puts the tiger's head on his lap, and caresses the animal while apologizing for everything. Sometime later he regains consciousness and realizes that the boat has reached an island. Pi quickly gets out of the boat and starts eating the plants and vegetables that surround the ground, and upon entering deeper into the island, he realizes that there are several lakes of fresh water in this place, in addition to the entire island being infested with meerkats. Unable to contain his emotion, he goes and throws himself into the lake, taking a good bath while Richard Parker has a snack with the meerkats. At nightfall he climbs into one of the many trees on the island and prepares his bed, but he soon realizes that the meerkats have also desperately sought shelter, and that Richard Parker has run back to the boat as if he feared something. Later in the middle of the night, he notes that the lake is glowing, and the lifeless fish are being corroded by the water, practically as if it were acid, and soon after he finds a flower, which when he opens it he finds a human tooth, which makes the boy realize that he needs to get out of there as soon as possible. The next day he prepares the boat, puts fresh water, several plants, and many meerkats to feed Richard Parker, then he uses his whistle to call the tiger, and then they both leave this deadly place. We return to Pi and Jan. The survivor reveals that he sees this as a work of God, that even in the midst of difficulties he still helped him, because without this island he would have perished at sea, and without that tooth he would have stayed on the island to have his lonely end. After a long time at sea, Pi and Richard Parker finally reach land. As soon as he arrives on the beach, Pi faints on the sand, and the last thing he sees is Richard Parker facing the forest. Moments pass and he is rescued by local residents, while he cries and screams, but not because he is grateful to be rescued, but rather in despair for being abandoned by his companion. Pi reveals to Jan that even though Richard Parker did not even look at him before leaving, and never saw him as a friend, there was still more in the tiger's eyes than his father had told him. Pi says that after all, the thing that hurt him the most was never having had a moment to say goodbye, to thank his father for all the things he had taught him, or to look at Richard Parker and thank him for saving his life, since despite everything he loved him. The whole story seems incredible to Jan, and Pi, moved, says he knows it, but also says that things don't need to have real meaning, they just happen. Then Pi tells that after the accident, the ship company sent 2 men to talk to him and find out more about the event, but after hearing the story, they don't believe it and ask him to tell a more plausible story. And one of the arguments used by them is that bananas don't float, so the orangutan couldn't have gotten to the boat on top of the fruit. After hearing this, Pi understands and retells the story, but this time without animals, mystical islands, or acidic waters. Pi comments that 4 people survived the shipwreck: the disgusting cook, the Buddhist sailor, his mother, and him. Unfortunately, the sailor was injured, and because of that, the cook waits for him to lose his life and uses him as bait for fish, which doesn't make Pi and his mother happy. Of course, after all, they thought that man was repugnant. After a few days adrift, the man attacks Pi because of a disagreement, but to save her son, Gita starts fighting with the aggressor, who uses a knife to finish her off in front of the boy, and after doing that, the cook throws the woman's body to the sharks. Pi tells, moved, that the next day he finishes off the man using his own knife. The cook didn't even try to react because he knew he had gone too far, and after that, Pi continued the rest of the days alone adrift in the middle of the sea. Pi tells Jan that after that, the investigators didn't ask any more questions, as they seemed to not like that story very much, and Jan also notes that this other heavy story is similar to the tigers, only with different characters. Then Pi questions the writer about which story he prefers, and the guy says he prefers the one with the tiger Richard Parker, which makes Pi happy and grants him permission to write about his story. Pi's family arrives and he goes to meet them, while Jan waits and reads the report made by the investigators, where he sees that the story recorded by them was the one with the tiger, and that amazes the man. So the movie ends with Jan being introduced to the new Patel family, and after so much tragedy, Pi had his happy ending.